Hey guys, Miss McDonald here. Welcome to my kitchen. This week I want to show you some things that I found around my house that were mine or some of my son's toys that you could use for educational purposes at your house. I'm hoping these are items that you also have at your house and that you could probably use. So the first thing I found are coins. I just happened to rummage around and I have a thing full of coins. So a couple of things that you can do with coins is for younger students, you can have them identify the coin. So you can have them identify that this is a penny, this is a dime, a nickel, and a quarter. If they already know those, then you would have them identify the amount. So how much is a penny worth? A penny is worth 1 cent. How much is a dime worth? A dime is worth 10 cents, and so on. For older students, one thing you can do is you can have them count the change. If I have 2 quarters and they're both worth 25 cents, how much money would I have? I would have 50 cents. And as you get all the way up into 5th grade, you could just give them some change and let them count it up. Have them write a math problem to go with it. All of these things are skills that not only do they need for school, but they need this skill for real life. I don't know about you, but I don't want to get wrong change back or give the cashier wrong amount of money. So I want to make sure that my money is my money. So have students practice with coins. That's tip number 1. Tip number 2 is if you have a deck of cards, you can use a deck of cards for all kinds of things. Not only can you play actual card games, which would be great for students to do at home during this week, but another thing you can do is you can play just plain old war, where you're comparing numbers. This is great for younger students. So what you would do is you pull one card. This is a 2-player game. So each player pulls a card. The person that has the larger number, so obviously this 7 would be my larger number, they would get to keep both of the cards. You go through the whole deck and they would be able to see who would win, would be who has the most cards at the end of the game. Another thing that you can do with decks of cards is you can play an adding game. So you start the same way you would with war. You each pull a card, but the first person to say the sum is the winner. So 7 plus 2 is 7, 8, 9. So the first person to say 9 gets to keep both of the cards, and you go through the whole deck, and the winner is the person that has the most cards at the end. Another thing you could do is you could multiply them. So instead of 7 plus 2, you could say 7 times 2. And the first person that said the product of that, which would be 14, would get to keep both of the cards. One other thing that you can do with cards is you can actually make fractions. So you could put one number on top of the other. And so this would be 2 sevenths instead of just a 2 and a 7. And you could compare cards. And you would have them compare which one of these fractions is larger. And then whichever fraction is larger, they could keep. So there are all kinds of things that you can do with a simple deck of cards. Really, I could keep myself and my kids busy most of the week with activities with cards. So that was tip number 2, is a deck of cards. Tip number 3 is a clock. So forgive me, this is Coach McDonald's clock, and he's a big Florida Gator fan. So I have his clock. So one skill that many students struggle with is telling time. So you could have your child look at an analog clock, because we get so caught up with our digital clocks now that reading an analog clock is getting very difficult. So just have them tell time by moving it around. If you have an older student, you could have them do elapsed time. So right now it's 3 o'clock. In an hour and 15 minutes, you can start playing a video game for 30 minutes. What time would you be able to play? And so they would have to figure out what time they get to play their video games today. So telling time and elapsed time with an analog clock is a great skill to have, not only for school, but just in life. All right, the next thing that I stole these from my son's room, and these are Legos. And Legos are great to just do some STEM activities of building and designing things. Tell your child, hey, I want you to go upstairs and I want to see if you can build me a bridge. And give them time to just go upstairs and play and build some things with their Legos. These are great skills to have, to be able to persevere and try and redesign their ideas. So just building with Legos is a great activity for kids to do at home. Another thing that you can do with Legos is you could use this as an area model, so for multiplication. So what you would do is you would have them look at this, and you can count how many of the little nubs are on here, or you can do 2, so how many are going top to bottom. So there's 2 times 4, and 2 times 4 is 8, and they could check their answer by counting all of the nubs to see if it equaled 8. For older kids, you could add some layers to that by adding another brick. So, okay, I know that this brick is 2 times 4, but if I add another brick, how many nubs do I have altogether? So if this brick is 8, and I know that the next brick is 8, so 8 plus 8 is 16. So you can do all kinds of things with mathematics with Legos, and especially letting them build and design some things with their Legos would be a great activity to do this week when you're not in school. So one other thing I found in my son's room is some Play-Doh. I think most of us have Play-Doh, and Play-Doh is pretty cheap at Walmart. It's less than $1 for a medium-sized tub. So one thing you can do is you can let them just play and design some things of their own. Another thing that you could do to include some writing in this week while we're off of school is you could have them design their own animal. It doesn't have to be a real animal. They don't have to do a cat or a bear or an elephant. They can make up their own animal and then have them write a story. If they're in kindergarten, maybe just write one sentence and help them write it. But if they're in 5th grade, have them write an essay about their animal and describe it. Tell what kind of environment it lives in and why. All of those would be fun activities to let kids do, and it makes it much more interesting to write if they get to build something with it with their Play-Doh. So this is actually tip number 5. So tip number 6 is probably one of my favorite outside of playing cards are beans. So these are actually coffee beans, and they're kind of small. So you could also use like dry pinto beans or any kind of dry bean. You could also use marbles or those little glass rocks. Anything that's just kind of small that they can get their hands on would be great to use. So you can use these beans for adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. So you can do all kinds of math with it. So to just show you a couple of examples that you could do with beans, I'm going to use a cookie sheet. And just a quick tip, I use a cookie sheet to pour these on so they don't get all over the place on my floor or on my kitchen table, but that's just a quick tip. So one thing that you can do is, now I would have poured these on and I wouldn't be using an expo marker, but they won't stay if I hold the cookie sheet up like this. So one of the things you could do is for younger students, you could have them add. So you could put 3 beans down and then add 2 beans, and what is 3 beans plus 2 beans? And they would put them together. They could actually physically put those beans together and count them again, and they would know that it's 5. If they're already past this, they could write a math problem to go with it. They could say 3 beans plus 2 beans equals 5 beans. Okay, so you can do the same thing for subtraction. They could start with 5 beans. And then you would say, okay, I want you to take away 2 beans. How many beans do you have left? And they would physically take the 2 beans away, and they would be left with 3. And if they're older and they're ready, they could actually write that math problem. 5 minus 2 equals 3 beans. I have 3 beans left. Okay, so moving on to multiplication. The way that you could do multiplication with some beans or marbles or whatever you have at your house is you could have them put them into groups. So I have 2 groups of 3 beans. So that would be 3 times 2. And so how many beans do I have altogether? Well, I have 6 beans. Okay? The next thing that they could have is division. So they could divide. You could give them all 6 beans or whatever number you want to. And you could say, okay, I want you to divide that into 2 groups. So they would physically take the beans and divide them into 2 separate groups. So I have 6 divided by 2 equals 3 in each group. Okay? If they had 7, so this is also a place, if they're in 3rd grade or older, where you start talking about remainders, leftovers in division. If they had 7 And you said, okay, I want you to divide those into 2 equal groups. Well, I can't make 4 and 3 into 2 equal groups. So I would still have 3 and 3, and I would have a remainder of 1. So these are just a couple of ways that you could use beans or marbles or whatever that you have laying around the house. I love these because they're physical. The kids can actually touch them. And you go from touching the materials and doing mathematics with touching it to writing it down and having them write out math problems. And it makes so much more sense in our head than just starting with numbers. So that was tip number 6. So tip number 7, and this is my last one, lucky number 7, is play board games. If you already have board games, great. You can play exactly the board games that you have. But to make it a little bit more interesting for students, if you would like to do something else with it, for younger students, you could possibly have them look at a board game that they already have and maybe make a tweak to it. What could I do different with Chutes and Ladders that would make this game much more fun? And have them kind of relabel this as their own game and play that game the way that with their rules and just see if it works. And then if it doesn't work the way that they had designed it, then go back and try again. Okay, well, this didn't work. What else could I do with this game to make it more interesting? If you've got an older student, like a 4th or 5th grader, you could take the contents of the game. So I could take the game pieces or the spinner. I could take a piece of the game, and I want to make my own board game that we're going to play together as a family tonight. How much fun are your students going to have if they get to make a game that you as an entire family play together? They're going to love that. So they can take just the pieces, they could take the board and use the board, but come up with their own rules. They can do all kinds of things with this. If you've got an older kid and they're super creative and they're ready, go ahead and let them design their own board game from scratch with just a piece of paper and let them draw it out. That would be so much fun to spend your time tonight or one night this week playing that game that your student designed. And so that would be a great STEM activity. So today I talked about 7 different things that I found in my own house that hopefully you have in your house that you could use to do some educational things with your students this week as we're home for a surprise week. So I hope you have a great week. Keep following our Facebook page and our Twitter page to see more ideas from Waterville. Bye!